Hi, I'm Laura Flanders of The Laura Flanders Show on public television and radio, and I am a long and fervent fan of City as Living Laboratory and the work of Mary Miss. 10 years ago, environmental artist Mary Miss founded City as Living Laboratory to create a platform through which artists could become meaningfully involved in the sustainable future of their cities. We're diving into this work through a series of conversations with Cole's team and some of the artists, scientists, and activists who've been inspirational partners throughout the years. I'm excited to invite my friend and City as Living Laboratories founder and inspiration, Mary Miss, to join me on the screen. Mary, your extraordinary career is a fantastic example of the role artists can play in helping people, all sorts of people, reimagine their relationship to the natural world and the city, especially that they're a part of. Take us back a little bit to the beginnings of all this. What was your inspiration, or who?
Working in the public realm is a really difficult thing. It's very complicated for an artist to find a seat at the table. They're not going to be offered that seat, and to try and put the chair in on your own is a difficult job. I really felt that I would like to do something that helped people understand the complementary role that artists could have to the role of educators or scientists or policymakers. We have a way of engaging people through direct experience. We have a way of making things tangible that might be too complex otherwise. So that was the start of it. So this thing of artists really helping people imagine the future. That's what culture can do. You know, culture is the domain of artists, the imagination is the domain of artists. And if you think of how long it takes to get policy changed, it can be a very long time. But culture is something that can spread in a very fast way. I did a proposal for a project around Ground Zero. It's right near my house in Lower Manhattan. And it didn't happen, but it was a doable project. It was a way to put flowers around the site for the duration of the construction so that all visitors who came to the site would be able to come as mourners. And that really inspired me. First of all, to do projects that were almost DIY, that you could take on at a reasonable scale. But trying to create a way to give direct experiences that would change uh, the situation. These were people who were being viewed as voyeurs, and we would be able to have them become mourners.
Well, that's just one example of the kind of historic events that you have taken as your sort of personal mission and helped us to relate to as individuals. Another, of course, is this year that we've just lived through, this year of COVID and shutdown. And I can't tell you, Mary, how many people, because I too live in Lower Manhattan, how many people have told me that they've gone to your South Cove for comfort, for just a bit of fresh air, for a place to go. You created a space that people could go to there on the river on the west side. What's your passion now, as your city is in some ways taken such a hit, your city of New York?
It's allowed me to think at the scale of a city. And that was really encouraged by conversations I had with Cynthia Rosenzweig, a climate scientist. Uh, and Cynthia said, you know, it's not going to be single uh, things being addressed. It's really got to be large scale. So in Milwaukee, we are taking on the issue of water at the scale of the city through a network that we're creating. In New York City, we're looking at the whole corridor of Broadway.
How do we get our cities back, meaning in a just way for everybody, perhaps not just for developers?
I've been really inspired by the people we've been working with in Milwaukee, for instance. We have a project that we're currently working on, organizing walks in an underserved neighborhood of Milwaukee. We're working with two wonderful artists in Milwaukee, Brad Anthony Bernard and Mikal Floyd Pruitt. And they're coming to meetings that we're having with a group of people who represent the neighborhood. There are discussions there. The artists are talking about things they're interested in. The people who are very familiar with what's going on in the community and who live in the community are talking about it from their point of view. A longtime resident of this neighborhood started talking about how she would like to see these different parts of the neighborhood interconnected. She said, what if we could have streams that begin to make connections between these areas?
For those who haven't done a walk with you or been part of a project, if they were to come to see a cool project in action, what would they see?
Walking has been part of my practice from the earliest days as a young feminist. It was hard to walk as a young woman in certain neighborhoods. It was really a privilege that I didn't take for granted. And as I tried to figure out a way to work that wasn't about making, monolith or uh, a monument, walking became very
Mm,
important as
mhm.
a part of this. I feel like if you get that artist and that scientist and the community members out on the street, you can begin to really take note. And it's not like you're being told about something in a meeting or reading a book or a paper. You see the real things around you. That's the way we begin to be able to come up with new ways of thinking about the city in the future. I really think that Call's initial impulse of being on the street in neighborhoods is so important. I think they're helping us figure out how to stitch things back together again.
Well, Mary, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. And for people watching, if you want to see more of my conversations with Mary, you can find it in our archives at The Laura Flanders Show, lauraflanders.org. Just saying.
One cold spring night, the promise of summer held back as if in spite, I emerged from a subway station on the edge of Williamsburg, on my way to meet a friend for dinner. I noticed an Orthodox Jew in characteristic all black attire walking swiftly towards me. I assumed he had found me suspicious, and not rare enough reaction to the mundane fact of my having black skin, and so was advancing threateningly toward the threat I was presumed to be. I began to move away from him, but not too quickly, lest I appear all the more guilty. He altered course to intercept me, like a bullet that wouldn't be denied its target. I zigged, hoping that a quick veer would get me away from him, but somehow he managed to close the distance between us. He didn't walk so much as glide. Perhaps the man was a ninja, and I had scanned him wrong. I stopped and flinched, thinking, not the face, please. But he leaned in and with gentle insistence asked, would you like to do a good deed? There's an undertone of challenge to the question, and also an irresistible strain of pleading. I answered yes, and he made a sharp turn and said, follow me. He took me around a corner where an older man stood with three young kids huddled beside him. Follow the rabbi, my chaperone said. So I followed the rabbi, who crossed the road, children in tow, entered the synagogue, and climbed the high stairs that overlooked its majestic hall. There, he stopped and entered a modest kitchen. He instructed me to unplug a kettle. When I had done so, the rabbi graciously bid me goodbye, and I stepped out onto the windy sidewalk, ready to rush to my appointment. But my good deed wasn't done, apparently. The friendly ninja said, there is one more. Come with me. Off we went, down the road to what turned out to be his own apartment. His wife and two curious children were standing in the living room. They had been waiting for hours, I was told, for whomever was ready to perform a good deed on a Saturday night. It was a Jewish holiday, Shabbat. And he had me set his thermostat at the desired temperature and turn on his dryer, which had wet clothes in it. As I was checking appliances, he asked what I did for a living. I'm a writer, I answered, and he asked me to email him my work. I looked at the email address he supplied and tried to repress a smile. It was the kind of address I'd expect from a playful teenager, not from this distinguished looking man who was graciously insisting on giving me food for my journey. I explained that I needed nothing. A good deed should be its own reward after all. Plus, I was on my way to eat Japanese food. But he insisted that I shouldn't leave empty-handed and gave me a freezy. Look, it's kosher, he reassured me. I stepped out and a neighbor was waiting in the hallway. He beckoned me to his apartment, one floor below, where I turned on the lights to discover about a dozen people standing in the living room. No longer in the dark, because I'd merely flipped the switch. I didn't have the heart to ask how long they'd congregated there in the darkness. Thermostat and kettle finally checked. I made my way out of this building, populated with people who depended on the kindness of strangers. Out on a quiet sidewalk, I looked around. No one was waiting to accost me. I stared up at the building, and the darkness in the windows tugged at me. Were people up there waiting for hands, willing to work on the Sabbath? Would they shout for assistance if they saw me? The only sound I heard was the whistle of a wind that rushed down to pull me along, as if someone had whispered that I was late. Suddenly, these sidewalks where I'd walked dozens of times before became a place more revealing, more mysterious. New York City does that to you. It sneaks up on you. It sneaks up on you and promises there is always more to see, to hear, to know. It surprises you with its inexhaustibility. At the same time, it reminds you that there is much that is hidden because of the basic algebra in which knowledge equals identity. Behind what is revealed lie layers of national histories and cultural rituals and religious traditions and family lore. The city, you see, is a fossil record, and every layer you peel back exposes another layer whose contours reveal only our limitations in knowing the city. And yet, New York is as ready to give of itself as it is apt to withhold itself. Nowhere is this tendency to announce its marvels while simultaneously whispering its secrets, as interwoven as within its immigrant communities. Thank you.
City as Living Laboratory sees artists as innovative coalition leaders who can chart a course towards greater community understanding and engagement in the journey towards sustainable development. Rooted in place-based experience, CALL's artist-facilitated programs foster a deeper understanding of a location's history, as well as the natural systems, social relations, and infrastructure that sustain life in that place. They connect personal experiences of the local environment to larger issues of sustainability and accelerate action and caring to take action toward concrete solutions. Programs succeed through interdisciplinary collaborations with scientists, urban planning experts, key community actors, and government officials. Over the 10 years, CALL has refined a flexible framework for our iterative development process. The walks, the workshops, and other exploratory activities integrate informal learning, grassroots activism, artistic vision, and scientific knowledge. And all that framework, so carefully created, provides a deep understanding of complex local structures and continually informs larger initiatives through ongoing research and feedback. Let's explore some of the projects the call is working on right now.
Since the beginning of City is Living Laboratory, we've been working in New York City on the corridor of Broadway, the 18-mile boulevard that goes from the tip of Manhattan to the top of the Bronx. We've looked at many different issues along that corridor in Chinatown, Harlem, and up in the Bronx. We've explored the corridor of Broadway through walks and workshops in different communities. One area that's been particularly interesting is the Bronx. Through workshops there, we found out about the problems with a buried stream. As you walk along Broadway in that neighborhood, you're actually walking on top of the stream. It's buried in the sewer pipe that's just below Broadway. We've been working with a variety of groups in the neighborhood to put forward the idea of getting the stream, Tibbetts Brook, out of the Broadway sewer and put it in an old rail corridor that runs alongside the Major Deegan Expressway. To develop a framing for this, I came up with the idea of rescuing Tibbetts Brook one stitch at a time. The idea would be to get many different artists involved in this process of getting Tibbetts out of the sewer and into the rail corridor. One thing that's really interested me for a long time is the idea of repurposing infrastructure. There are 7 bridges that cross the future corridor where the stream could be, as well as the Major Deegan Expressway. We decided that it would be really interesting if we could take those bridges over with the words "Rescuing Tibbetts Brook, one stitch at a time" written on the sides of the bridges. Those would be the large size stitches. Smaller stitches could be imagined in other ways. Matt Jensen's talking about doing a quilt and having it actually stitched by people in the neighborhood. The artist Bob Brain has done his tattoo project in this neighborhood. Over time, we want to be able to help people imagine this stream in its new location. What we're trying to do is to begin to get people to imagine the landscape of this Bronx neighborhood, reimagine what it could be in the future.
I am standing on an old rotten log in front of a vernal pool in Van Cortlandt Park. The pool is going to drain into Tibbetts Brook. Tibbetts Brook is going to flow through the park and then disappear into the sewer system instead of being above ground in the form of a vital estuary like it used to be. So the Tibbetts Brook Tapestry is designed to reveal what used to be there and what could be there. It's designed to imagine the potential of this landscape. Right now, there are rooftops and rooftops and rooftops, and you can see them for acres and acres. But the tapestry is a way to engage people's hands and their minds in building this tapestry together and imagining what it would look like if all of these spaces had green living things on them. Not a park for people, but a place for birds and insects and plants, a place where water can collect and cool the neighborhood. And it's a really complicated green infrastructure concept that would be explained in some ways by this collective activity of this tapestry, a sort of map of the neighborhood built through embroidery, built through many, many volunteers and many hands, stitching together this 18-foot long object that could move throughout the neighborhood and be installed in different schools and libraries and exhibits, and meanwhile teach people what is below them and what could potentially be around them someday.
With City is Living Laboratory, I have been able to expand and deepen a body of work that is centered on community access to water. I am excited to collaborate with CALL's team of artists and scientists on their ongoing project, Rescuing Tibbetts Brook. This project is of personal importance to me, as Tibbetts Brook is a buried waterway that flows through my neighborhood of the Northwest Bronx. Every effort has been made to suppress this waterway, but it remains a powerful force, revealing itself on rainy days when it floods the Bronx Broadway corridor. Regardless of efforts to daylight Tibbetts Brook, its presence still remains hidden and unknown to the majority of area residents. During a 2020 winter workspace residency at Wave Hill, I produced a series of cyanotype prints that map the original trajectory of Tibbetts Brook and its later permutations, as well as the inevitable urbanization of the Bronx. The cyanotype print illustrates the proposed Harlem Shipping Canal. This man-made carving out of land and water eventually buried the estuary at the south end of the Bronx, which included Spite and Dibble Creek and Tibbetts Brook.
The work that we're doing at City is Living Lab builds on the work that many other organizations have been investing in this neighborhood for a long period of time. We're trying to help make it visible. So there are all of these problems, but how to get people to pay attention to them in the midst of their busy lives? We feel like artist projects can begin to draw attention to this initiative and build support, whether it's directly within the businesses and residents, or it may be with a group of policymakers that can help make change happen.
Broadway has always been City is Living Laboratory's organizing principle for our work in New York. And in 2012, we had our first walk in Chinatown as a part of a marathon trek along the whole corridor. Since then, we've organized many walks and workshops in this neighborhood, exploring the environmental issues that matter most to the people who live in, work in, and love this community. With the leadership of artists and designers like Jean Shin, Mary Ting, Joyce Wong, Tat Fu Tan, and Stephen Fan, we've been working on proposals and projects that engage the community in diving deeper into some of these concerns. Inspired by a common thread in many of our artist proposals, we're looking at issues of climate, equity, and health through the lens of the food system. At our last workshop in January, participants were sharing some of their favorite Chinatown memories. And one of our participants mentioned that when they go to visit their family in Chinatown, the first question is always, "Have you eaten yet?" Food is a universal language of love. It's a carrier of our memories, of our cultures and traditions. We're mapping the complexities of the food system, identifying risks and celebrating inherent sustainable practices. We're looking at ways to introduce more green space, from portable gardens to the DIY planters Jean Shin has dreamt up, converting plastic bottles into vessels for traditional herbs. We're celebrating and sharing cultural knowledge through projects like Tat Fu Tan's Wujing Oracle cards. This beautiful deck of cards features watercolor paintings of produce items with healing properties that you can buy in any market right here in Chinatown. The cards come with a booklet being produced in partnership with traditional Chinese medicine practitioner Donna Ma that will help people understand what foods they could seek out at various times of the year or for various health impacts. These projects are just the beginning, planting the seeds for a growing initiative.
One of a series of projects that we're currently working on in Manhattan Chinatown is to map the dynamics of public and private spaces and uses, with an emphasis on how the food systems impacts those dynamics. Well, the mapping project is seen as a tool to spread awareness of the public realm as a public asset. So how does the usage of streets, curbs, and sidewalks have implications on climate change? For example, street tree coverage, to issues of social equity, such as street vendor rights. And the map has been informed by insights from local community members and organizations. Ultimately, the map is conceived of as a directory of organizations that are working with these issues and to try to connect the public to those organizations.
I see art making complex environmental issues visible, really giving some kind of visual form and representation to things that we don't necessarily see. The project that Stephen Fan and I are working on in Chinatown is about engaging various people who care about Chinatown in conversations about what they value and why, and what changes they have seen or they're concerned about due to gentrification, climate change, shifting demographics, and the food policy environment in New York City. We want to expose the multiplicity of visions for a sustainable food system in Chinatown and understand where its resilience lie. Climate change is affecting the farmers who plant and harvest Asian vegetables for New York City. Fresh fruit and vegetable consumption is critical for health. Access to affordable, complete and culturally appropriate foods is key to healthy lives and key to food security. And finally, equity cuts across all of these issues and many issues within our food systems, including issues regarding labor, economic development, and entrepreneurship of small business and street vendors, immigration, and the Asian American experience in the United States.
We all know that the global food supply has many challenges to come as we adapt to a changing climate. But we can't leave this conversation without also talking about equity. New York City's Chinatowns have been amongst the worst hit neighborhoods by COVID-19. In addition to the challenges that all of our urban communities have faced, Chinatowns have faced the additional horror of racism and prejudice-based fears. We encourage you to not just support the projects that we're doing in Chinatown, but to support Chinatown businesses.
Watermarks is an atlas of water for the city of Milwaukee, and it's an initiative started by Cities Living Laboratory back in 2014 to bring together diverse communities through coordinated walks, local art projects, and resident storytelling to engage residents in their communities and to help celebrate water throughout their great city. The physical framework for this initiative consists of a series of illuminated water markers in neighborhoods across the city. These markers will serve as community gathering spaces and provide public Wi-Fi as a means to provide access to Watermark's voices and also to create opportunities for residents to share their own stories about water. The markers also have a built-in water alert system designed to echo the central beacon for this project at the Jones Island Water Treatment Plant. Both the markers and the stack will communicate with the public through light when there is an increased concern of a sewage overflow into Lake Michigan. But at its core, the initiative is all about working with local artists to create engaging projects that promote sustainability through the arts. Because here at CALL, we believe that artists have the unique ability to inspire greater community understanding in the journey towards sustainable living. Our walks pair local artists with scientific experts to bring together diverse collections of people to demonstrate ways we can encourage local residents and neighborhood stakeholders to think about social and ecological challenges their communities face, and how, when we work together, we can work to overcome these challenges. Our resident storytelling initiatives, or Voices, are a way that we can unite communities by sharing personal experiences about water and the perspectives of Milwaukee residents and their relationships with water-related issues. We also invite residents to participate in a series of workshops. It's an integrated starting point for residents and artists to work together to prepare concepts for new creative projects to help make complex environmental issues tangible for Milwaukee residents. The culminations of these efforts are celebrated through the implementation of artist projects, where artists are chosen to create a commissioned work of art in the community that they're working with to address a specific water-related issue or topic based on the walks and the workshops and information learned collectively through those processes. All in all, Watermarks is a comprehensive initiative to support artists and communities in their cities to help create personal connections between themselves and the water systems that support their lives.
There was sort of a silo of people talking about Milwaukee as a water-centric city, and I wanted to expand the conversation. I wanted people to celebrate our water and sustain our water. And so I was looking for somebody that could help us tell the story to a wide audience.
What drew me to Watermarks and what excites me about its potential is the way that it engages communities all across the city in learning about the environmental geography of urban water and the way that our water is both connected with other systems, but is also meaningful to different communities in different ways. I think that art is extremely important for communicating about water and urban water, both because it enables communities who may not feel comfortable with the language of science into a deeper understanding of water, but it also allows us to apprehend water in ways that science alone can't do. Water carries meaning for people. Water is spiritually important, it's culturally important, and art has a capacity to communicate that no other kind of language does.
I've been involved with the Watermarks project here in Milwaukee, and it truly has been a great way to combine art, science, and community, and give people a fun way to connect with Milwaukee's waters. It really offers people an opportunity to learn and grow and have fun through the power of art, and make them feel like they're stewards of our shared waters. I really believe that art can kind of capture people's hearts around water issues and spur them to become stewards of that resource.
It has been illuminating to see the call methodology at work here in Milwaukee, to watch that expansive vision unfolding across the city, picking up partners, sites, and believers along the way, and making Milwaukee a more sustainable, resilient place.
Moving forward, we have 5 new watermarkers planned for installation. In the corridor specifically, we're currently planning a new round of watermarks walks and workshops, as well as preliminary coordination for a commissioned artist project and dozens of more community voices to be heard and shared throughout the neighborhood. But 2021 is really just the start. With a long-term goal of adding dozens of watermarkers throughout the city and engaging Milwaukee City residents of all kinds in ongoing dialogues about water and water-related issues for many years to come.
Right now, we're making an impact in the Bronx, Chinatown, and Milwaukee. Real place-based experiences, dialogue, relationship building, and collaboration with artists and designers is at our core. Face-to-face experiences in public spaces is our bedrock, made near impossible this past year. Several years ago, with the help of the Mellon Foundation, we convened a group of artists with leading ecologists, planners, and activists to consider CALL's evolving framework. We asked, how can we advance sustainable development, addressing climate change, equity, and health on the broadest possible scale with artists in central roles? This conversation with a dynamic group was fantastic and very far-reaching. But one concrete suggestion emerged from the meeting: create a national call walks network. The National Endowment for the Arts stepped in with an Our Town knowledge sharing grant. CALL launched a pilot program with 6 cities across the U.S. Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, and Santa Fe. Great feedback came from these influential national partners. Now we have a toolkit available on our website for other groups to conduct their own walks. A first step to organize around collaboration, looking at environmental challenges in all their complexity, with artists and designers in leading roles.
I had the opportunity to work several times with CALL Walks. In one occasion, I worked in collaboration with Dr. Luke Dixon from London, and we did some humming and bee sounds and some very exciting exercises with a group of people online. On another occasion, I embarked with John Butler at Van Cortlandt Park, and we did the Tree and I.
With a bioengineer, we walked a corridor called Century City Triangle. It was an amazing experience. I got to learn a lot of things that I did not know about places that I drove past each day. I had no idea of the prehistory of those places, of factories, of people who had worked in factories, who were on the tour and shared memories of childhood memories of living in that neighborhood, now since removed. And I hope to remain aware of different actions that are taken on behalf of sustainability in the city that I live in.
I was invited to do a walk in Van Cortlandt Park to discuss about water systems in the neighborhood and the history and the cultural connection with the water systems up in the northwest Bronx. And that walk was just the beginning of wonderful relationship that will bring so many good productive things for me through Cities Living Laboratory. As important as meeting my current partner with whom I founded a non-for-profit organization called OSS Project. It was thanks to Cities Living Laboratory and one of the workshops that they organized to connect local stakeholders and community members with creative practitioners to try to address and discuss and workshop some of the issues present in the neighborhood at the time and see if some of the creative practitioners could help. And it was there in that workshop I met Jackie Fisher. And Jackie and we managed to transform one of my art projects that it was called Outer City Shadow into a non-for-profit organization that now connects artists with communities in order to create and develop gardens that serve as platforms to celebrate, empower, and create knowledge and cultural identity. It changed my life, and it changed the life of communities of the 4 nature developments where now the non-for-profit has gardens operating. Cities Living Laboratory were fiscal sponsors for the organization at the beginning, and even with the first garden. I sincerely don't think that without the support and the help and the existence of Cities Living Laboratory, I could have been able to make it. And I hope that you join me in this gratitude.
We are working on a new initiative with the Berkshire Museum and the Berkshire Natural Resources Council, as well as other nonprofits, to amplify the synergies of the region's cultural and natural resources and connect with underserved communities, as well as visitors to these precious resources. Our walks may seem like a modest approach to reshaping the future, but we have seen what happens when you ignite the senses and get communities to collaborate with artists. We learn how to make a real difference.
As Olivia has highlighted, CALL's aim is to equip others to be a part of doing this work. That's a whole big part of Mary's founding goal, equipping other artists to lead on projects that can impact the fabric of their cities. She's now joined by Charles McKinney, former principal designer for New York City Parks and the chairman of CALL's board. They're going to share some insights into CALL's vision for the time ahead, for the future. Let's listen.
I have to say, I feel so lucky to have Charles McKinney as a partner in Cities Living Laboratory.
Well, don't you love it when people you work with have skills you don't, and that those same people make you reach higher or dig deeper than you could on your own? We have evolved to the point where the staff really provides the leadership and brings talent to bear, and are veritable Pied Pipers for artistic and community intelligence.
I'd like to ask you, Charles, what do you see for the future of Cities Living Lab?
I see us maturing. I see all of our talents being able to make the city better, drawing out the creative talents of others. You know, I've joined this organization because I'm educated as an architect and an urban designer, and I didn't have much contact with scientists or artists. And Mary made it possible for me to understand just how much leadership you can get from an artist because they see the world differently. How do you see our work setting a precedent for other artists in other cities?
What I would really like to imagine for the next decade of Cities Living Laboratory is that a constellation of artists are going to be able to start working in neighborhoods across different cities, going into communities, addressing issues that are important to those particular communities. Our goal for the future is really that the projects that we've been doing in the last decade at Cities Living Laboratory will be precedents for artists, for scientists, for communities. Climate change is complicated. It can't be made simple. but it can be made accessible. At the beginning of this event, I was speaking with Laura Flanders, and she asked me a question that I think is really important. We've been through this year now and going on to the next year of COVID. How do we get our cities back? Do you think City is Living Lab can have a role with this?
It's so important to demonstrate optimism and demonstrate a facility of effective action. I think people are tired of expressing opinions and they want to do something. And I think one thing we do is that we create opportunities for people to do what they can do. And sometimes it's small things, but because we're all working together, they are cumulative. It changes everything. Tibbetts Brook is a story because of that, because you can't fix the whole city, but because we've been able to pick an area that generates support for within government and within community and within elected officials, it's important because then the community sees that, well, indeed, things change. They involve small, productive acts.
People think that it's pretty strange that an arts organization would be working at the scale of the city. And I have to say, Charles has really made this possible for us. We were looking at Tibbetts Brook, but Charles said, you can do this. You can really focus on this. And that's what we're doing. We're working with this range of community groups. We're working with the Department of Environmental Protection. But with somebody like Charles and the experience he has, we've been able to take on some really big issues. In a minute, we'll hear from someone who has been on this path with us since the beginning. Tonight's honoree and my longtime friend, Agnes Gunn. We are so grateful for our partnership with her. From the wisdom she has shared over the years to the major gift she has just pledged to us this week. Aggie's support and yours tonight is a profound endorsement of the important roles that artists, designers, and creative people can play in shaping a better future. Thank you.
This is, it seems to me, an excellent point to pivot over to call board member, award-winning landscape architect, and editor of the recently published Black Landscapes Matter, Walter Hood, as he speaks with our evening's extraordinary honoree, Agnes Gunn.
Thank you so much, Laura and Mary. I'm just honored to be here tonight talking with Agnes Gunn. And I have been sitting on pins and needles because I know the important work that Agnes has been involved in and her support for the city as the living lab. But I've always knew Mary's work because, I've just followed her career, and she actually was a kind of a guide for the kind of work that I wanted to do, because her work was very landscape intensive, right? And in landscape architecture, no one was making the kinds of work that she was making. And so I tried to emulate a lot of that.
You must have been very interested in the piece that she did for us, the piece down in Battery Park City.
Yeah. With the halo.
Very much about landscape.
Yeah, and I use that every year as a case study to my first year students.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very successful pieces that's been done outdoors. I was on the group that put that through.
So is that what attracted you to Mary? Her use of, I guess, materials and working with the environment, or was there some other thing that attracted you to her work?
I believed in what she did. She always, when she started on something, she wanted to finish it. She wanted to do it. It was always realized, and I just liked her. And the work she did, I followed that, and then she got into this other work, which I have followed. I love how she's made environmental and socially sustainable central to her practice and collaborative approach to art. I love the grassroots aspect of Call and how the residents of a specific urban community help take part with the artists and the scientists in a given initiative. As a collector, I've long had a focus on artists of color and women. I don't know how this was conscious of me or whether it was because I simply loved the art that I was responding to, but it has been said I have a sensitivity to those who are often seen as left out.
It sounds like, though, from an early position, I guess this issue of justice has always been an interest of yours, particularly through art. And I wonder, how far can art go? Do you think, I mean, can art like really be this tidal wave?
Art should be much more central, and it's turning out to be, and people are finding that because so much of it is real and realistic, storytellers that paint a picture of human toil and of things like mass incarceration, Helen Wang and many others at the Ford Foundation towards finding justice for them. And Art for Justice is really an extension in some ways of Studio in the School.
Because I love your idea that when you were talking about art, that it's not just about one group of people, but art is diverse, right? As an architect and designer, between Carnegie libraries and things like that, right? That you saw a lot of people, particularly in the 20th century, giving money to civic things that had a civic presence, whether they were libraries or other kinds of buildings.
What they have naming opportunities.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And now, if you say that, moving into a much more diverse realm that is less of a naming opportunity, how do we get more philanthropists to sort of see what we're doing, right? So that, this can become legacy, for them as well.
Brian Stevenson uses the name Phil activists. He says Phil activists use their resources to confront injustice and oppression. They seek to disrupt the status quo and pursue change that not everyone values. I believe we are seeing more philanthropists and people doing uncomfortable things. Does not have to be a choice between the economy and the environment. Does not have to be an inverse relationship. I think this is a myth, and I read a wonderful quote in the Huffington Post article a few years ago. A healthy environment is a prerequisite for a healthy economy. The economy relies on the planet's ability to provide resources and the necessities of life. If the pollution we produce is reducing its ability to do what becomes catastrophic, it becomes catastrophic for the economy. I do believe, like Mary, that the power of art can help drive change. I hope that more people will see artists and art institutions as a part of the fabric of solving problems. I think that artists are really at the fore when it comes to political and social causes and the envisioning a better future. I think art can make a difference and can help us think outside the box and drive social change. So I really do agree with what Mary has been doing and how she's trying to do it. I think it's a very hard thing to attract people to because it doesn't have naming opportunities or a high profile. But I think a high profile is not all that. Climate change is affecting all of us, but of course, disproportionately, it affects low-income communities more than communities like ours, who already have a higher rate of health conditions. These communities are more exposed to environmental hazards and take longer to bounce back from natural disasters. I think the one thing that Brian uses all the time in the talks he gives around is that you have to get proximate with people. You have to be involved with the people that are doing, are seeking the change and are trying to make the change and are trying to, after so long, come forward as Black artists are doing now.
What I thought your last, the statement you made was a good way to sort of sum up everything. And I'm impressed with, I mean, the people you're talking about are my heroes. And so I'm really, impressed that, people like Brian and others are, part of, the work, and they're articulating it. But this notion that, art can be this powerful lens in which to work. You made me just sort of think of my own career, that I came to art school later in my practice. And I started out in landscape and architecture, urban design, but when I got to art, it kind of freed everything up. And it, in a way, gave me a different courage, right? Because these other disciplines keep you in this kind of narrow straitjacket. But in a way, art really allowed me to show myself, right? And I think this is the thing, that if we see more people showing themselves and being accepted, that creates that kind of diversity, that you're articulating. So I really appreciate, all the work that you're doing. And I look forward, to seeing the continued results.
I hope that this will leave you with a sense of both the scope of work CALL is doing and the broad nature of its collaborative vision. So much of CALL's programming is about dialogues and learning from one another, and the conversation just never stops. There are countless ways to join in, from walks to workshops to online programs. Stay engaged, stay visionary, and help shape the conversations to come. Thank you.
It's really great to spend time with people you admire and people who inspire you, like Agnes Gund, who has really helped our organization tremendously choose a direction. And Walter Hood. Walter, I don't even know how you made time for us. You are such a busy man and so talented and intelligent. And Laura, you bring gravitas to our evening. And Garnett, no one can top your words and your insights. And then as I go down the list and think about all the artists and scientists and community people who've contributed valuable time, valuable art, valuable insights to this evening, it's just beyond compare. What a great evening. And, there's no way to thank everybody on the committee, but I have to say, Ray, we wouldn't have been able to do this without you. It's been a great evening, and I really appreciate your energy that you brought to it, and continue to participate in Cities Living Laboratory. I believe it'll bring you joy.